And we are recording.
Hi, Task Force family. My name is Victoria Kirby York. I use the pronouns she and they, and I serve as the Deputy Department Director for Advocacy and Action here at the National LGBTQ Task Force. And I have to say, I'm excited about the treat you all are in for. I have long admired my colleague Janice, who is someone who's been a trailblazer in our movement and in our organization for a very long time. And for Pride, I thought it was so fitting to be able to let all of you in on some of the magic that makes the task force happen. And JT is definitely a big part of that.
Oh.
So with that, I want to give JT a chance to introduce himself.
Victoria, you're ridiculous, and I adore you. Janice Tom, I go by JT. I have all kinds of idiotic nicknames, but Janice works. He, him pronouns. And I have been at the task force for 15 years, something like that, a long time. Right now, I'm the director of operations in our development department. It's my fourth job here. They have finally found one I can do.
Well, I think you've done all of them pretty damn well.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, as we kick off Pride, now more than ever, we have been really reminded about the history of Pride in this country and the fact that it started out not just as a protest, but as a literal riot and uprising against sanctioned violence at the Stonewall Inn in New York City. And as a longtime activist in New York City, leading Pride in New York for a very long time, I know there are so many lessons and experiences and moments that have really guided the work that you do. And I would love for you to just share a little bit about that experience with our members here.
I'd love to. You know, I was a volunteer with Heritage of Pride, the New York City Pride organization, for something like 20 years. And I was on the board most of that time. And that was when being on the board really meant that you were willing to carry heavier things longer distances than other people. And you know, you're right. I mean, in this moment, remembering that Stonewall was a riot, and also remembering that it was a riot that was led by Black and brown people, mostly. It was, you know, the Stonewall Bar, depending on whose history you listen to, was either very diverse or it was all white boys. I think it was probably very diverse. Just judging from who was at least outside on the street that night. And that riot lasted 3 or 4 days and included, like what's going on in the country right now, the burning of police cars and the barricading of the police inside the bar. So was that the first part of our movement? No, because that ignores people like Barbara Giddings and Frank Kameny and those original days outside Boston City Hall. I'm sorry, Philadelphia at the Liberty Bell, right? But was it a galvanizing moment? Yeah, it absolutely was. And, you know, I learned that early, and then just learned a slew of lessons as I worked on Pride. Some of them purely practical. I stage managed rallies, I did budgets, I trained volunteers. I probably trained thousands and thousands and thousands of volunteers just to get people down the street safely. I mean, there was a time before me when Pride happened in New York without a permit. The cops wouldn't give us a street permit. They wouldn't give us sound permits, none of that, you know? And so we marched up half of 6th Avenue, and they had to stop traffic so as not to run us over. You know, but I certainly worked on it when the cops were not happy about having to deal with us and having to give us a permit, and that's changed. But, you know, all of those lessons, I use them all the time in all 4 jobs, right?
So one of those jobs has been being the person putting together the plenary experiences, creating change. Our stage manager, so to speak,
Yep.
making those moments as special as they are. There's sometimes, at least for me, some of the most memorable moments at creating change, like how you've been able to curate conversations and really powerful moments for people. I'll never forget my first Creating Change as a staff member at the task force. It was it was in 2016, and it was a focus on the Black women in particular, and looking at intersectionality around racism that tied into our queerness and our identities as women. And it had Charlene Carruthers from BYP 100.
Right.
There was a fierce trans activist that was on the stage, and Barbara Smith, I want to say, was the third
Yes.
person. And like that experience was like my moment of really feeling like, wow, I really do have a home here at the task force. And so anyway, what has been your approach in really kind of creating that magical space during Creating Change, and how was that informed by some of the events you pulled together at Pride in New York, particularly some of the events at the pier?
Yeah, well, you know, I don't have as much to do with the content, the fabulous things that the program, as much as I have to do with the flow. You know, whoever has been the director of Creating Change, and now we have the amazing Andy Garcia, kind of decides what the topics are going to be and who the speakers are. So my job is to get in touch with them, make sure they know where they need to be when, get the mic, make sure they're on stage, make sure I have their speeches in advance, because otherwise our ASL interpreters and our Spanish English translators can't do a good job. And language justice is critical to Creating Change, because we want as many people to get out of it what they need to get out of it as possible. You know, we talk about Creating Change being a transformative experience. And obviously it was for you. I didn't attend until I started working at the task force, which is kind of funny but it was at the exact same weekend as what was then the Interpride conference. And I was president of Interpride for some period of time, so I couldn't do both. I had to pick. I also financially couldn't do both.
Interpride is too, just for folks who...
Interpride, I think it might have a different name now, but it was the International Association of Lesbian and Gay Pride Coordinators, and then we added bisexual and transgender pride coordinators, and then we just gave up and called it Interpride. And it was an international organization of the people who organized prides in places as big as New York and as small as the whole state of New Hampshire had one in Danville. And you know, so we got together once a year for a big conference. It's way bigger, it's way more sophisticated now. It happens all over the world. But, you know, I took what I learned about just organizing things, how to make things get done. You know, one thing after another leads to this big, fabulous thing. And I applied that to Creating Change, certainly to the plenaries, but also my job as business manager. If you can't pay for stuff, you can't get it done. You know, folks complain about, oh, Pride is too commercial. You know, we've got all these corporate floats. I mean, do you know how much a portable toilet costs to rent a day? And a handicapped one is more. So do you think your friends in wheelchairs shouldn't be able to pee all day? Does that seem fair? So sure, would it be great if we were less dependent on corporate dollars? I suppose so, but we're dependent on dollars. And without dollars, you don't have, among other things, access. You know, we pay our ASL interpreters at Creating Change. It's the same thing as paying for a sound system, which without a sound system, I wouldn't be able to enjoy the plenaries, right? Because at the moment, I'm a hearing person. So, you know, all of those lessons are also lessons from Pride about access and availability and the fact that sometimes you have to pay for shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To talk about this piece on personal transformation before I interrupted you to ask more about Interpride and you know, your earlier experiences with Creating Change. How do you view like your own personal transformation, but the personal transformations that happen during Creating Change and at Pride events?
You know, even with Pride being as sort of big and fabulous and, you know, certainly in a city like New York, right? There are also still many places on the planet where stepping off the curb at Pride is taking your life in your hands, which could still be true here. I mean, a trans man was murdered in Florida just this week, right? He took his life in his hands by being out and trans, and somebody took exception to it and murdered him. So you know, 50 plus years after Stonewall, we're still in danger as queer people. I mean, certainly working on Pride transformed me into someone who would say, I can do that. I can do that. I'm going to stand on the street and, you know, sell buttons until we sell enough buttons for a portable toilet or for a sound system, or right? I can do that, which was a new thing for me. But, you know, and I think creating change is so transformative for folks because it is like the big queer reunion, right? There are people who are lifers who go all the time, and there are new people. I mean, we have high school kids going now, right? From GSAs. We had like 50 kids from some school in West Virginia last year. Kind of amazing. But, you know, one of the things we did last year at Creating Change was you had to have your pronoun on your name tag, or the name tag wouldn't print. I mean, we literally put a little piece of programming in there. It would not print until you told us what your pronouns were. So put them on there. And I had, of course, lost my name tag and needed a new one. And someone said, oh, what pronouns do you want on it? And I thought, wow, she, her does not make any sense to me anymore. So I said, he, him. And it was the first time as a grown-ass person that I admitted to the world that I was trans. And it was transformative to be walking around with that on my name tag. You know, nobody noticed because everybody knows who I am. Nobody reads my name tag, but it made me feel astonishing. And, you know, part of the problem is for a lot of people, Creating Change is the only time they get that. You know, you and I, we have the great good fortune of being gay for pay and of working at a place like the task force. You know, lots of people go home to families that don't understand them or don't want to understand them or hate them for this reason, right? Especially now. There are probably people locked up with their families and it's not going well.
Yeah.
Which is all the more reason that we have to keep doing work like Creating Change. We have to create more liberation. We just do. It's our job.
That's one of the things that I love about Pride too, right?
Mm-hmm.
The space where you're like, I'm not by myself taking the bold action of being fully who I am, right? Which shouldn't be a bold thing, but it is in many places, right?
Yes.
And so Pride has been that for me too. Like, I know I'm in a crowd of other queer people holding my wife's hands.
Yep.
You know what I mean? There's like safety in numbers when it comes to visibility, right?
Yeah, there is. It just feels great.
How has that changed from like the earlier parts of you started volunteering for Pride in the 70s, the 80s?
80s, don't make me that old. Yeah, the 80s.
Okay, the 80s.
Yeah.
And how has that experience kind of shifted over the years?
Well, I mean, I think it shifted in the same way. Fortunately, our liberation movement has forced the country to change. That there is more freedom to be yourself now. And you still could be taking your life in your hand if you turn, you know, the wrong corner in Jackson Heights, right? Mm-hmm. You know, Minneapolis thinks of itself as a very liberal city. And yet, so, but is it better? Yes, it's better. Sure, it's better. There are organizations that exist now, some of them spawned out of Creating Change, that wouldn't have existed 25 years ago. Certainly did not exist 50 years ago. I mean, 50 years is not a long time in human evolution. And so we've created some amazing organizations that have done amazing work and have allowed people to live better lives. You know, whether that's the fact that we have marriage, which doesn't solve everything. Yeah. But it's a marker in the same way that being able to serve openly in the military, not as true now as it was a marker. You know, I have been an anti-war activist all my life, and my parents were veterans. But do I think that it's important that queer people can serve in the military if they want to? Since we have a military, yes, I do. And I wish they wouldn't, right? In the same way that I wish all soldiers would put down their guns and walk away, because that would solve it. but they're important markers of our part of our being part of the country. And we are certainly not full citizens. We're certainly not, and you're not as a Black woman, right? I'm not as a non-Christian. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we're just not, because our full selves are not accepted.
Yeah.
And that's the work of things like Pride. And that's certainly the work of organizations like the Task Force and, other organizations doing really, really hard work to create liberation, to create joy.
I feel like
that was a long speech.
Sermon right there.
I was preaching.
Yes. I definitely want to talk a little bit more about your experience as a child activist, particularly in the anti-war movement, and how that helped to shape your activism. There was one of the things that you mentioned was being gay for pay now, right? But you haven't always been gay.
No. Mm-mm.
I know. I think about like the fact that you led Pride in New York for 25 years, was a part of that leadership group, and a lot of that was as a volunteer. All of that was as a volunteer.
All of that was as a volunteer, yeah.
And so, what was it like for you being out at work, like prior?
I wasn't, depending on, so 20 years of my younger life was a bunch of jobs, right? A bunch of different jobs. And I was not out at all, but, oh my goodness. Probably, I've been here for 15 years. I've actually been out the whole time I've been at the task force. And before the task force, I worked at AMFAR, where I was certainly out. And that was quite an experience. Boy, that is a heck of an organization. And before that, I was a librarian. I have a master's in library science, and that is one of the world's great jobs. But I was a librarian for banks and brokerage firms. Also a really cool job. But let me tell you, banks and brokerage firms in the 80s and 90s, not the safest place in the world to be out.
What was it like for you and your colleagues, coworkers?
What
was it like for you and your coworkers? Like, did you know other gay people at the job?
I knew I had a boss at Security Pacific who I knew he was gay. He knew that I was gay, and we never said a word to each other about it. But I discovered after I left there that while he worked there, and I think while we worked together, his lover died of AIDS, and he took like 2 days off, and he never said a word about it. And no one knew, and I suspect actually that no one knew that he was gay, that he had a lover, and that his lover had probably been sick for a good long time, and then had died of AIDS. And I can't even feature how you do that. And on the other hand, I can completely imagine how you do that. I mean, that has to be the dictionary definition of compartmentalization. But the AIDS crisis also did that to a lot of people, that had to happen that way. And the AIDS crisis was also one of the things that shoved our liberation forward. Right, we're almost in that moment now, when people you love are dying. One of the, just talking about COVID, one of the big differences with HIV and AIDS is that everybody who got it died. No one got better at a certain point, right? I have friends whose entire address books emptied out at the height of the AIDS crisis here in New York. And I'm sure that's true in other big cities and also small towns in Montana. People just died. There was nothing for it. And that made Pride so important every year. So important. And, we had people would say, oh, well, our group should be first, blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, sure, you can go first. And I'll let all the PWAs in wheelchairs just mow you down if you'd like, because I'd be happy to tell them to do it. Yeah, I mean, it's something that no one needs to see again. No one needs to see it again. And organizations like ACT UP and PWAC not only changed the lives of people with AIDS and their families, but they also changed the lives of people with breast cancer, because it became a new way. I mean, the FDA finally had to say, okay, you're right. we have to approve drugs, we have to create drugs, we have to do clinical trials in a different way, because the way we're doing it is not working. You know, Anthony Fauci will now, Larry Kramer died last week, and Anthony Fauci is very clear that he loved him. And that was a love forged in a particular kind of battle, that it's not the only time it's happened, and it will not be the only time it's happened, unfortunately, but it is that kind of a battle for your life that moves movements. And I think we're in that moment now for the whole country and the whole world, but certainly for this country's soul. We're in a battle for this country's soul right now. Yeah. And it's a battle that has happened time and time and time again. And maybe it's just the severity of it at this moment, and it happening inside the pandemic that's being mangled and mishandled by a government that does not care about us. That it feels as though maybe this is the time where we walk through the door and leave the baggage behind and create liberation for everybody. A girl can dream. Yeah. A boy can dream, right?
I need a shirt and a bumper sticker that says that. Create liberation for everybody.
Yeah, well, that's what we do. That's what we try and do every day. That's what we try and do every day.
Yes, it's true. That is definitely our work.
It is.
Wow. Oh, so many good nuggets there. Oh, wow.
I know you wanted to ask me about the child activist thing, which cracks me up. It makes me feel like, something out of a Judy Garland film. Really. And I mean, Judy Garland, really, we could just go off on that for a while. But, my father's parents were union organizers. My grandparents were all immigrants. And they were union organizers for the needle trades, the ALGWU, the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union. And, so my father inherited that. And my parents both did. And they, when the Vietnam War broke out, they made it really clear that this was a war that should never have been started. It shouldn't have been started by anybody, the French, and it shouldn't have been picked up by the Americans. And they were anti-war activists. And my mother was a public school teacher. I think at that point it was third grade. She taught a lot of different grades. And, back in the day, you said the pledge every morning, right? You stood up and put your little hand over your little heart, and you said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag that was hanging at the front of the room. And my mother was not going to say the pledge. So she would get her kids started, and then she would stop, and she would stand there with her hand over her heart, but they couldn't tell because they were all mumbling their way through it. And I just stopped standing up. So I was probably in 5th or 6th grade, I guess. Wow. And I just stopped standing up. And I don't think I have stood for a pledge. Huh?
You pulled a Kaepernick, kinda, but for different reasons.
Right, exactly. And I don't think I've stood for the pledge since then. So then some of it was mimicking my parents, which is something kids do. But I also understood, because we talked about it all the time. We talked about it at the dinner table, and I haven't stood since because there's not we do have American soldiers dying for no reason overseas right now. But it is a volunteer army, and that's different. It is different in some ways, but I know that this country doesn't fully accept everything about me, and would be happy to slaughter people who are at least a little bit like me, where there's a little intersection between my life and theirs. I can't stand for the pledge, and I certainly can't with the current occupant of the highest office in the country. I can't. And, do I have many opportunities to stand for the pledge? No, I don't. I don't go to sporting events. I'm not in school anymore. But, at Pride, I went to Pride a couple of years ago. A friend of mine who's my best friend, who I met doing Pride, and he came into the city, and we thought, he lives upstate now. Let's just go. We'll hand out t-shirts for an hour, right? And do a little bit of volunteer stuff. So we did that. It was a lot of fun. We saw people we hadn't seen in forever. And it's so much fun to just be there where people are like wandering around and being proud and wearing rainbow tube socks and have no idea what they're doing. It's like, do I need a radio? Does my t-shirt, the whole 9 yards? Like, could you help me cut the sleeves out of my t-shirt? Like, all of that is just so wonderful and so human. And so as the march was kicking off, which I was march chair 3 times, and it is, I can't even tell you what it's like to stand in the middle of this sea of motorcycles and, you know, listen to the countdown from the sound system, because now we have enough money for an actual sound system, and throw your hands up and have these motorcycles go by you for what feels like hours. And like now you're stuck because you can't get out the middle of Fifth Avenue because like there are all these motorcycles. It's the most amazing thing in the world. Everybody should experience something like that in their life at least once. So, you know, after we were done with the t-shirts, Franklin and I walked out to the sort of the edge of Fifth Avenue to watch the march step off. And I don't remember if they did the pledge or if they had some wonderful singer do the Star Spangled Banner. And we both looked at each other and we went, this is not our event anymore. And, you know, we both felt a little bit sad, but on the other hand, there were also all these people and floats and balloons and flags and drag queens and stone butches just lined up every color and every ability and every age. And now like people with baby carriages, right? Just lined up all the way up Fifth Avenue. And I thought, well, all right, this was a moment that I don't get, but this thing that exists to free people and give people all of this joy this one day a year, it still exists. And I'm really glad that I was part of it for a long, long time. I met people who will be a part of my life forever, right? I mean, it is really like making friends on a sinking raft sometimes. But yeah, that looking at the flag and going, I wish that was mine, but it's not. No, my grandparents came here deliberately for a better life, and they got one, and so did I. And so we got to finish the work.
I think that might be the only reason I do stand for the pledge. I do it with my first step, to be clear.
Good for you.
But I do it because the words are a promise to me, right?
Yeah.
Like justice for all, or like a vision statement almost. It's like we're not there, but that's the vision we're working towards. And so I know everybody don't feel the same. You clearly don't. I no longer, especially after I learned the rest of the words to the Star Spangled Banner. I was like, oh well, definitely not doing that one anymore.
Yeah.
Just in the air, even though Whitney Houston's version is so beautiful.
Oh, come on. Whitney could sing the phone book.
Like, you conflicted there.
Right.
But you talk about like the change in our movement, right? And the good and the bad of it becoming more, of pride becoming more corporate, right? But
yeah,
there have been changes over the past 50 plus years in our movement. Yeah. And like marriage equality is one of the biggest ones that's happened in the last couple, I guess it happened 5 years ago now. Did you ever think that?
No. So I remember when New York City or state, I don't even remember now, got domestic partnership. And I remember standing with a whole bunch of people from Heritage of Pride in the middle of Christopher Street in front of the Stonewall, and there was a big rally and everybody was all excited and there were speakers. And, I even think the governor might have come, I don't remember. 5 years ago, it seemed, well, that was way longer than 5 years ago. I remember turning to someone and saying, yeah, we're never going to get marriage though. There's no way in the world. And I really did believe that. And when we got marriage, I was at the task force, obviously, because it was only 5 years ago. And I was tasked with writing 3 press releases because we didn't know how the decision was going to go, right? One where we lost, one, and I don't remember the point of this one, where it was like we won some of it, and one where we won, where we got marriage equality. And I could write the first one easily. I could write the second one easily. I could not, and I'm a really good writer. I could not write a press release where we won marriage. I could not do it. And I had to, I tried and I just thought, I can't do this. And I'm not going to do it by deadline. So I went to a slightly younger member of the staff who had also only been out for a little while. He came out kind of in his like early 30s and he'd only been out for a little while. And I said, Matt, could you write this? And he said, oh yeah, like that. It was not a problem for him to write this at all because it made perfect sense to him. He hadn't spent his whole life going, oh, they're never going to let us faggots get married. They're never going to let us queers get married. No, there's no way in the world this is happening in this country. And he didn't have any trouble imagining it, and so he could write about it. And I thought to myself, well, look how limited, you know, with all this liberation and all this work for freedom, and you work at the task force, and you did Pride, and you did street activities, and look at all that, and even so, you can't imagine this step. You can't imagine this piece of equality. And I thought, well, there is a lack of imagination there. And, you know, sometimes your lack of freedom is a lack of either your imagination or somebody else's. Like, I can't imagine, you know, like, there are people who would look at me and can't imagine that I'm trans, right? It's their lack of imagination.
I don't know, JT. I done been seen it. Like, okay.
Yeah. Ain't nobody having trouble with that, Janice, actually. Nope. That's great. That is so funny, VKY.
Well, because you used to have in your signature, anything you want to call me is fine. I was like, I know that struggle.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was a struggle, right? And you know, and what an amazing thing to live in a world that people like you and me and, oh my gosh, talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, that we created a world where I can do that, where I can like walk through that struggle and let people be patient while I imagine it, right? What a wonderful thing. And you know, just like all those motorcycles, everybody should get that moment in their life where they get to go, oh, this is it. This is what joy feels like. And now I can't hear a thing for 3 days, but even so, right?
You inspire me so much, and our colleague Barbara too, because that joy also comes from not being bound by age, right? It's like you didn't think to yourself, or at least at this point, like you're like, I didn't do it in my 20s or 30s, so I can't do it now. You know what I mean? Like, you get there when you get there, right?
Yeah.
You get there when you get there, whatever it is, whatever age it is, right? Like your journey.
Yeah, I mean, there was certainly a little bit of that, but then I went, oh, you know, here I am. Like, why would I, like, don't deny yourself. And, you know, if there's anyone I could be when I grow up, it would be our colleague, Barbara Satin.
She is pretty fierce.
She is pretty goddamn fierce.
She's another icon we should do one of these things with.
Oh, we should. What a good idea.
Oh my God, it'd be amazing.
Oh, I'd watch that.
Now, one last question. I just have to ask you this. I was gonna go into the direction of like a Hopi kind of question, but
Hopi
changey stuff, right? Pictures on my wall, right? So it's part of my makeup at this point.
It is.
But one of the things that you've shared with me, and I'm a geek and nerd about the task force history, but back when we've changed our name 3 times, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Like the National Gay Task Force, the Gay and Lesbian Task Force, now we're the LGBTQ Task Force.
Right. And,
you know, you've gone from staffing like AIDS hotlines or GRID hotlines back when it was bad, and seeing all these different like manifestations, even in like some of the buildings that we've had, like, or been a part of, and going from like, you know, some raggedy spaces to some nicer spaces.
Yeah.
And I want our audience to hear a little bit about what that evolution of who we are and what we're worth.
Yeah. You know, the first gay, and I mean gay with a capital G thing I did, was I was a volunteer on the National Gay Task Force's AIDS hotline, which was called GRID. AIDS was called GRID early on, and GRID stood for gay-related immune deficiency, because the world really did think that only gay people got it. And we were the first 800 number for anything gay in the whole country. And there were volunteers who staffed it at night at this raggedy ass office at 85th Avenue in New York, when we were headquartered here in New York. And, you know, we are certainly in many nicer office spaces. When I started the task force, our New York office was hideous. There was nothing nice about it. And then we sort of, you know, scooched our way up to this really cool office we have now that, of course, none of us are in, right? But it is lovely. You know, and one of the sort of iconic spaces in queer life in New York is the Gay and Lesbian Center, which now has a longer name. I think they actually just call it the Center because they had to keep changing it, and they decided to stop. And it is 100-and-some-year-old high school building, and it was the High School of Maritime Trade and Cooking Arts. You know, when kids went to high school to learn a trade, which is not as common now. And it was a mess. It was in violation of 2 EPA clean air standards. It was full of asbestos, and it was heated by a coal-fired burner. There was a woman who lived there, who was a sort of a janitor, but also a stoker. And this is what is now the Callan Lord Community Health Center, which is kind of like Whitman Walker in New York, was a room in the center at the height of the AIDS epidemic. And the building was always kind of overheated because the people with AIDS who were there were cold all the time. So it was this, and the building was overflowing. ACT UP met there every Monday night. That downstairs, which must have been a gymnasium at some point, was a big room. You had to climb over boards to get to any of the staircases to go to any of the other rooms. It was not handicapped accessible. If you couldn't walk stairs, you could almost not get in the building, right? It was just this big old New York City school building. And, you know, they had a couple of capital campaigns, and it is now lovely. It is completely accessible. There's an elevator. I can't even tell you how, because the staircase up to the second floor was this great big staircase that there were times when I would get to the top of it as an able-bodied 30-year-old and think, boy, that is one long, steep staircase. So it kept people from getting to there was a woman in a wheelchair who worked in an office on the second floor, and they had to set her up a little office on the first floor because she couldn't get up those stairs. And it's clean, it's well lighted. There's a little coffee shop in the foyer. It's lovely. And I was in there shortly after they sort of reopened it. It has this big donor wall. I mean, it is just fabulous. And I bumped into a guy who had always been the operations fellow there. He was the one who played 3-dimensional chess so that you had a meeting at the right time in the right room. He was an amazing, he was the rock on which that church was built. No two ways about it. And I said, this is beautiful, Bob. I said, it almost seems too nice. And he said, oh no, Janice, we deserve this. This is just as nice as we've always deserved. And I thought, yep, again, a lack of imagination. Of course you're right. We have deserved this and more the whole time. And we still deserve more, right? And so many people do. So many people deserve their full humanity, and it's denied, right? And again, living in this moment in time, what could be more clear than that people deny their full humanity based on nothing more than who they are as humans? It's so crazy. That's why we do what we do, right? Rising tide lifts all boats, we hope.
That's right.
I hope we're right. I think we are.
I think we do. Oh my God. Yeah. Beautiful note to end on. We definitely deserve more. And we're going to keep fighting for more. And
we are.
Thank you, JT.
It is a joyous thing to do.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your life, for being a champion of our rights and our spaces, creating so many spaces for us to be who we are.
Yep.
This Pride season, especially, to be able to live in the full joy, as you said, of who we are, of all of who we are, right? And to continue fighting to get that more that we deserve, that all that we deserve.
Yeah, nobody gets left behind, not in our fight.
That's right. That's right.
VKY, thank you so much.
Thank you, JT, and thank you everyone who's tuned in to watch this Just a Moment with Janice Tom of the National LGBTQ Task Force. I'm again Victoria Kirby York, and please leave your comments and thoughts in the chat, and we hope to see you the next time around.
Yep.
Keep the fight going.
Bye, folks.
Bye.